Have you ever had something great to share and you felt like your students just missed it? Have you ever really felt like you had bought your time into and invested yourself in a message or in time with student ministry, but you ended up spending more time with your students trying to quiet them down, gather and garner their attention and try to get them to focus on you than you actually did getting them to focus on the message itself or having yourself being allowed to focus on what you're saying? That's a common problem that happens in student ministry all the time, and it's something that needs to be dealt with in a proper and strategic way that works in your favor, rather than something that detracts and makes you feel like a bully that constantly is looking after people, or having your leaders or other young adults in your student ministry having to constantly focus and direct attention towards you. So the whole point of what I want to talk with you about in the next few minutes is being able to expand the attention span of your students, to be able to use creativity and your crowd control methods to be able to engage more in ministry and less in actually going through the ropes and the constant cycle of gathering and garnering somebody's attention. So what you need to go into is an idea that's centered around something that happened a long time ago. Everybody knows the story about Pavlov's dog, where he rang a bell and essentially got that dog to salivate because it thought it was going to be getting food. Because every time he rang the bell, he gave the dog some food, and he rang the bell, gave the dog some food, and eventually he would ring the bell, the dog expected food, and it would salivate whether it got the food or not. We're all built in with certain defense mechanisms as people, and it has to do with what we see and what we hear. Ever been to a baseball game and seen somebody do the wave through the crowd? It starts with one person, other people see other people doing it, and they all engage, and it goes around the entire arena or stadium or wherever you are. It's the same principle. If you had actually noticed that when someone is preaching a message and they get very quiet, and then all of a sudden they shout at you, you got attention that you didn't have before. Well, you can use these same tactics to your advantage to be able to keep the focus on what you're saying. As a youth pastor that's been in student ministry for over 10 years, I have actually never had to tell a group of young people to shut up or use very, very harsh words to be able to garner and gain the control of the crowd. It's simply because of some principles that I learned a long time ago when I was working as a counselor at the YMCA. They had a policy that said be firm but kind and never derogatory to any students, so we had to do everything that we could do to create a positive atmosphere to be able to engage these children's attention and have them listen to us. It's very, very simple. Now, I don't have a giant crowd of people behind me here, but it's as easy as using simple techniques like audible techniques, audible cues, call and response, and you'll see your crowd engage in what you're saying. Usually, the easiest thing that someone can do is if they're standing in a crowd of people, a group of teenagers, with a microphone, and they're all talking and chattering and you want to get their attention, is just to say something like, hey guys, quiet down, quiet down, quiet down. But in effect, it doesn't turn out to be easy. It becomes very long and drawn out, and you spend more time trying to tell people to quiet down than you did actually sharing what you had to say. Why don't you try something slightly different? If you're on the microphone, why don't you say something like, if everyone can hear me, clap your hands 3 times. And all of a sudden, the first person that claps has everyone's attention. And then by the next clap, you'll have most of the crowd, and by the third, everyone will have clapped 3 times. Give them another command, almost like a game. If you can hear me, snap your fingers 3 times. This may seem juvenile, it may seem contrived and simple, but it works. I'm telling you, after 10 years of using this, and 5 years of using it with the same student ministry, it still is effective. When I'm on trips, when I'm in crowds, when I'm in restaurants, when I'm actually trying to minister and get them to focus on a message that I prepared, that I feel like God is going to speak into their hearts, I can use simple methods like this to gather attention. Now, one of the methods that really helps beyond anything is proper planning. I know this sounds very simple and basic, but there's a lot of student ministers that really focus on one thing or 2 things, but not the whole picture of student ministry. If you have a good flowing plan together of how to keep a student's attention, you'll be able to use that to your advantage. Typically, in my student ministry, I have several elements that I combine that I feel like are very effective in reaching the kid, connecting relationally, engaging their mind and their heart, calling for a response and challenge in ministry, and also having some fun. So typically, like you'd see at an event like Accelerant or Youth Quest or the National Youth Ministry Conference or different places that you might go with your peers, people start off with some free stuff, they get some interaction going, and they'll have an icebreaker, which is huge. You can also involve and engage your students in being a part of that. And then turn the focus into ministry time. All the while, in every transition, you don't have to spend time trying to get their focus back. If you would simply say something like, everyone that can hear me, tap your knees. It may be quiet, but they're all listening for the cue and they want to do what you're doing. So they're going to repeat that activity. Trust me. I know it sounds simple. I know it sounds a little bit childish, but it will work. I've used this on high schoolers for years, and it's proven and it's effective. Now, part of engaging your students on that level and having a good plan and using these cues to be able to continually keep their attention is drawing them into the picture of student ministry. You know, all these tricks that we can use and we can try to be able to really get them to focus in won't amount to much if they don't feel like they're a part of what you're talking about. As relevant as you want to be, youth pastors, youth workers, youth leaders, get your students involved in what you're doing. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean you need them to preach the message every week, but they do need to have a voice in student ministry. In my student ministry, for about 2 months, we walked through the book of Ephesians. And in doing so, we were trying to identify with what that church had done when it was first formed. We also saw in the book of Acts, actually, you know what? Third time. Sorry. Try again. All right. My student ministry for about 2 months walked through the book of Ephesians, looking through what we could glean and gather from God's word. And what we saw in that church led us to several different places in the Bible. We looked at the book of Revelation and what God had said about the church at Ephesus. And we saw that God had said that they need to return to their first love. We saw that they had done so many things right, but God yet still said, I have this one thing against you. It's that you've forgotten your first love. That took us back to the book of Acts. We looked at the book of Acts and we wanted to see what they were doing when the first church at Ephesus had been started. And what they did principally was they started these cultures of confession. People confessed their sins. They talked about their life. They shared it with a community of believers. And our students at 12-1 Student Ministries are now in a place where they feel like they're in a safe environment to be able to share about their life, to be able to share their struggles, to be able to share and rejoice in the good things that are happening in their life. But they're bought into student ministry. They've taken ownership to it. And I feel like that's such an important part of what we can do as student ministers, to be able to make them feel like they're not just receiving instruction from us, but rather they have a deepening relationship with us. Just like we modeled that, we're modeling our relationship that should be deepening with Christ. So use these tactics that I've shared with you today, as simple as they may be. Having a way to get someone's attention, having a set plan to go about doing ministry, and having a way to connect with students will take you so much further than you ever have. And all the time that you had spent trying to gather somebody's attention and getting them to focus will all turn into actually being able to encourage, to instruct, to lift up, to see life change in the lives of students in your ministry. My name is Nate Marriner. Thanks so much.